Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live. Darth Anonymous coming to you from Terra Prime headquarters. We are here with our weekly show, our webcast on everything sabering, our love of the art of the lightsaber, the LED saber as we are using it, to explore all kinds of things that, related to martial arts, Star Wars, and other things. So, thank you for joining us if you are watching. On our panel tonight, we have some of our learners in exile, our apprentices. We have Eric. How you doing, Eric?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Very good. Okay. And Gary, Count Arcanus, how's it going?
I'm doing well, thank you. Must yourself?
Very good. Very good. All right. And Michael, Grand Moff Saber, how's it going?
Guten Abend. Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. All right. All right. So tonight on the show, what we're going to be talking about is breathing. Now, breathing is an interesting thing. We're going to talk about it in, many different kind of contexts, if you will. But one of the things that I think we're going to try to get across through this whole thing is that breathing, not only is it something that we always do, and we always have to do, but it's something that we always have to concentrate on. It's something that we have to constantly be, thinking about. And we'll show you different ways to kind of use breath in conjunction with what we're doing. Now, we'll go through a couple of different things. Obviously, the most common kind of cliche thing is equating the breath with meditation. Even on the Daily Show recently, they had somebody talking about meditation and breathing. We'll talk about a little bit about that. But more often than not, I want to get away from a little bit of that and start bringing breath into a more dynamic sphere. Because one of the things that I as a teacher, have the most problems kind of imparting or getting students to do, especially vibrant students who want to, get stronger and faster and everything like that, is to concentrate on their breath. Because if somebody's breath is out of whack, or they're not breathing correctly, not breathing optimally, that's going to pretty much sap your performance of a lot of energy, a lot of effectiveness, a lot of power, all of that, a lot of duration. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. There's, of course, mental reasons for that. There are physiological reasons for that. And we'll go kind of into all of them. And hopefully we'll get some questions from you out there and from our panel. So I think what I should probably do is just start right in with the idea of breathing. What is breathing, and why should we concentrate on it? Breathing is an interesting thing. Obviously, it's something that we need to do. If we stop breathing, we stop living. So it is something that is constantly tied to life. The breath is life, all of that. When you look at real-life systems like yoga and qigong or martial arts or anything like that, the breath is equated with energy. An energy which is not unlike the energy that the Force was based on in our beloved movie series. Now, there's, again, many reasons for this. One interesting reason and thing about breathing is that it is the only function of our body that is required for life that is both autonomic and voluntary. Meaning, I don't have to think about breathing. I can go along with my daily life, making my eggs, doing my work, working out, all of that kind of thing, and my breath will just kind of go along with me. But I can also control my breath, right? Breathe at particular rates. Choose these kinds of rates of inspiration. I can even hold my breath and not breathe at all. That, again, is limited by, what's going to happen. Obviously, my autonomic system is going to take over and make me gasp for air, unless I'm some kind of weird, which is not much of a superpower. But anyway, so we can, not only can breath affect us, but we can affect breath. And in that way, we can then affect those things which breath affects that we can't usually affect. One of these things is emotional state. It's very difficult to change your emotional state. Emotions, by definition, are just reactions to stimulus. So you get poked with something, you react to it. One way that you can kind of gain control over this, and this is where the meditative aspects of breath and breathing come in, is there is a certain breathing pattern that is physiologically associated with stress. Right? And this, of course, is shallow, labored breathing. Right? If you can concentrate and merely breathe very regular, there's an interesting little effect that happens neurologically and in your brain. And that's basically, not all of the criteria are met for the fight or flight response to trigger fully, right? It's going through its checklist. Okay, we have the perception of threat, we have something in front of us, we have an elevated blood pressure, but we don't have elevated breathing, right? And then all of a sudden that kind of interrupts that whole cycle of escalation that happens in you. And this is very, very commonly used and referenced when dealing with anxiety. People constantly use breathing exercises to calm their anxiety. So why does that work? If we're sitting there and we're anxious, we're at the dentist's office, we're doing something that's unpleasant, we're about to get into trouble with a boss or a teacher or something like that, certain things happen to our body, and these things signal and are signaled by the stress, but also kind of signal what our body's getting ready to do. And we mentioned the fight or flight response. And one of the things about the fight or flight response is it's the readiness of the body to get ready to do one of two things: fight or flee, right? And what that requires a hyperoxygenated blood supply, very, very active muscles, a very high heart rate, and, higher than usual blood pressure. Right? Now, all of this is to facilitate you doing sustained effort, or maximal effort, either running as fast as you can away or fighting for your life, right? And what that does is it triggers something in your brain. When these things, the stress comes in, you perceive the stress. That will then trigger a physiological response to it. That physiological response then will in turn feed information into the brain saying, okay, we're getting ready to fight here. That will start triggering what we call our stress axis, right? Stress axis has been triggered, of course, when the stress comes in. But as the heart rate goes up, the blood pressure goes up, everything kind of goes up, it's agitated even more. Many people may have heard of a chemical called cortisol. That's started to be released into the brain and into the bloodstream. And what that does is that gets us ready for fighting or running. And one of the triggers and one of the things that will exacerbate that escalation of physiological response is your breath rate. So when you get anxious, that whole process starts in your brain. You can interrupt it simply by breathing in, breathing out, breathing very, very slowly, interrupting that breath. Right? And it's going to do various things. Number one, it's going to start showing your body there's nothing to worry about. Look, we're not really respirating high. So that's one criteria that's not met. But the other thing is it's going to start to distract your attention. You're going to have to start to concentrate very, very hard on just breathing that way. And I'll show you some techniques of how you can concentrate on breath. Because there are right ways and wrong ways to breathe. So it diverts your attention. So all of a sudden now you're looking at trying to count your breaths and making sure that you're breathing in for a certain number, breathing out for a certain number. And then all of a sudden, your brain starts to let go of whatever that stressor was at the time, right? And most of the time, these stressors are temporary. Once you get over it, your brain can kind of process what's going on. It comes up with a solution. It's no longer afraid. There's no longer any anxiety associated with the situation. So that's kind of how a simple breathing exercise, doing just kind of separating yourself out and just breathing very, very deep, can even have a very profound effect on your behavior and, how you feel. So that's kind of like a precursor to the whole thing. Why don't we open it up here to the panel? Do you guys got any questions to start out with, or comments on the beginning there?
Is this, do you think, why people sigh when they face adversity, I guess?
Yes. Sighs are definitely part of that breathing cycle. Okay, you're taking in a big, deep breath. You're holding it. You're letting oxygen kind of come into your lungs. You release it, right? There's a physical feeling. You have tension in your torso, and then all of a sudden the tension is being released. And it really does feel kind of like you're exhaling it out. When your breathing becomes labored and shallow, you start to get jittery, and you might start getting tingling in your fingers and stuff like this. And all of these phenomena are things that allow us to make correlations to breath and energy, because when we breathe right and when we breathe wrong, stuff happens in us which we kind of feel, but we can't really see, we can't really put our finger on. But yes, sighing is one of those things. There's a lot of little things that we do every day with our breath. If you're going to push something heavy, and this will come in later on when we talk about what we're going to use the breath for, the first thing you do just before you push is you take in a big, nice, deep breath, and you hold it, and you go out. Now, what that's doing is creating intra-abdominal pressure, and that stabilizes our lower back, our lumbar spine. And it's our lumbar spine which allows us to stand upright and to transfer force from the ground into our arms. So anything that we're doing with our hands that requires power, like pushing something, moving through space, or swinging around a saber, all of these things are going to be dependent on what we call our core stability or core activation, that kind of thing, and that's intimately tied to our breath. So when we have lots of these little intuitive things that we do, that are almost hardwired into us, that teach us how we can best use our breath. But we also have a very, very long history of things that we can do to use this breath, maximize it, maximize the different things that we can do by controlling our breath. I think probably the first place, as we're talking about, is the controlling of stress, tension, or what most people call meditation. Let's see, we've got a question here, or a comment, actually. My father has always taught me to take deeper breaths, even as a child, and now it's normal for me to always take deeper breaths, even sitting still. And that's a very good way to think about it, is you're always trying to take deeper breaths. You take them way in here. Now, the interesting thing too, and you might notice this as I'm sitting on this stool, which has no back or anything like that, that I will kind of change height. And you will also notice that when I inhale, I tend to rise, right? Now, part of it is because I'm constantly moving around, so my spine is bending and I'm going up here. But when I inhale, that causes a whole cascade of events that happen right here in my torso, and it almost requires me to stand up or to kind of sit up. So as I inhale, I'm coming up. Now, important here is we got to talk about the proper way to breathe. And the proper way to breathe is, as we say, diaphragmatic breathing or abdominal breathing. In our community, we have, if you have a costume or anything like this, you might have a belt, right, or an obi, which is the sash right here. This is usually worn about navel height, maybe a little higher, right here at the waist. So this is a good guide. When we want to breathe like we're pushing at this, at whatever's around our waist, but with the bottom part of it. So not so much up here. That will happen, but we want to think of more pushing out this edge right here. So when I inhale, my abdomen expands down here, and I don't know if you can see it. We'll try to get a good thing here. So if you watch this piece right here, when I inhale, that expands. When I exhale, it contracts. Now, the nice thing about having the obi or the belt, when you breathe, you can push against that belt so you can feel tension. Make the belt tight. Exhale, make the belt loose. Inhale, tight. Exhale, loose. And that would be the first step. That's bringing your breath down. Now, the reason we want to do that is anatomical in nature, and that's because our lungs can expand much longer this way than this way. They can expand this way, and they do, right? But they're shaped as lobes that kind of hang down like this. What happens when we breathe is the diaphragm pulls down here, and it pulls this down kind of like a bellows. Then this also opens up, which also kind of acts as a bellows. So as we go, it sucks that air in. And when we want to push the air out or exhale, we think about that that spot underneath the diaphragm kind of inflating here, and then we're pushing it up. So we're kind of pushing our lungs up from the bottom, and we're pulling the lungs from the bottom as well. And we're not going to think about that, but that's kind of what's happening, biologically and anatomically. What we do want to accomplish is a nice, good, deep breath that is going to engage everything around our waist. Okay, and that's really our core and all of that. And we want to keep sinking it down and bringing it down. Now, as we're breathing, if we're going to sit here and we're just going to breathe, we're going to want to inhale through our nose and exhale through either our nose or our mouth. Okay, we always want to inhale through the nose, and that's why we do tend to go to gulp air when we're short of oxygen. That's going to be always there. But our goal in breath work in higher levels is that we won't get out of breath so we don't start to gasp like that. So we're going to try to keep all of those inhales in the nose. That will give us a nice, good oxygen, carbon dioxide mix. We'll go in nice and smooth. There's no excess moisture in there, like in the mouth. It's not going to interfere with our saliva or anything like that. Any of those other things. So we always want to kind of inhale through the nose. We can exhale through the mouth if we want. if we need to get rid of the air. But when we're sitting here and we're just going to meditate, or we're going to try to, manage our stress, we're going to really, really just focus in on the diaphragm and just breathe in and out through the nose. And you can pick a count. Most of the time what I do is, if you don't have a belt or an obi, what you can do is you can put your thumb, and here, let me get rid of this bottom lower third thing here. Boom. What you can do is, and I'll move the camera down just a bit here, is take your hand and place it in your navel, and then hold your hands like this. And then when you inhale, they come out. When you exhale, they come in. You can also do variations, a yoga variation is to lay face down on the floor. It's called crocodile breath, with your hands like this so that your nose doesn't get crushed. You can keep a nice neutral spine. All right? You inhale and you push your stomach into the ground. All right? Get your back to raise up by pushing your stomach into the ground. And then you do the opposite. Let your lower back sink into the ground as you exhale. Or, like how I learned it, you flip yourself over onto your back. You put, in my case it was a hot cup of tea, but use a shoe. You put a shoe here, and you put a shoe there, and then you breathe, and you try to make the lower one move and keep the upper one completely steady. And that will help you focus kind of everything down there, because we want nice, good, deep breaths, and we want to engage our core. Breathing, as said by many people, Mark Chung, Gray Cook, is the most fundamental movement pattern. It is a movement pattern, and it is involved in all of our movement. And so we want to kind of maximize it that way. Here, we're just kind of getting a handle on our whole body. Feel our body going out of control, getting anxious, getting worried, getting angry, something like that. We can take these deep breaths. We can start using these techniques to bring ourselves out of that state. You know. So, okay. Before we move on, why don't we open it up? Anything you guys got there? Questions, comments?
Well, yes, it's first of all, it's something every musician already knows, I think. Singers, trumpet players, they all work with their breathing into your belly thing, and holding your, in sword play we say, holding stance there, holding your bases. And yeah, and for me it's something I often experience when I'm nervous or in stress situations. You mentioned it. It always, I have a tendency to something to feel like standing beside me, and this is something to really get me back into myself, to feel myself more, to really. All right, I can feel me. I'm not watching me. Yeah, it's something to get me back. Oh, no, I hear an echo of myself. Okay.
No, that's okay. We don't hear anything on our end, so.
You know what I mean.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I teach Tai Chi, and so we did get a comment on YouTube asking if it was like Tai Chi. Yes, Tai Chi and pretty much any martial art, we're going to get into that in the next half hour, uses breath intimately. Chinese systems especially go way overboard with their breath. So there's that aspect of it. But yes, musicians, not a stranger to this particular things. Anybody who's been trained in Alexander technique, another thing, acting, projecting, all of these things. Not everybody is born with them, right? But everybody can be taught to do them. Yes, so that's it. How about you, Gary? You've Have any questions for us or comments at this stage in the game?
Well, not really questions as such, but certainly comments. I mean, actually, Michael kind of beat me to it. Because I'm trained in martial arts and so this kind of thing, diaphragmatic breathing, is something that I'm quite familiar with, and very much it was taught to me very much in the ways that you were describing about using the lower part of your abdomen. One of the things we were sort of reminded of, certainly in my singing lessons, was about trying not to let the shoulders lift up. So when you're sort of breathing in and out, you're trying to keep your shoulders kind of neutral. Whether that was just a sort of a process to help us not breathe from the top of our chest or what, I don't know. But it's as Michael said, it's not something that is unfamiliar to anybody who's done any kind of wind instrument or singing or indeed, like you said, martial arts before. I mean, it's fairly sort of common and familiar, but if people haven't done those disciplines, then obviously it will be new to them.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this too. In my experience with martial arts, even long-term martial arts practitioners always neglect their breathing. I can't tell. I mean, I can get people to do a kettlebell workout at the drop of a hat. I cannot get people to do an hour of qigong, which is just breath work, right? Standing there, learning how to breathe, all of that kind of thing. Nobody likes working on that because it's, it doesn't seem cool. There's no flash to it. Somebody sees you working on breathing, that they don't know anything's going on. Well, how can I meet chicks like that? But if you know how to use breath, and here's where we're going to kind of move into the martial arts aspect of it. You can learn how to do things that most people will kind of look at and not really understand how it happened. Tai Chi is a good example. There's lots of examples of Tai Chi masters making people kind of like bounce, like they go boom and they bounce away or anything like that. Or they're able to fight off people with very, very little effort and all that kind of stuff. Breaking demonstrations where people break objects, right? They get let out a shout, right? And that shout is merely breath, right? It's just a breath. You don't need to make the shout because you can see people doing the same breaks with no noise, right? They just go or make some noise, right? They just don't make a shout. And it all goes back to that analogy I was saying when we were looking to push something heavy and this intuitive thing where we and then we push, right? Because what we're doing is we're intuitively making our core very, very strong, very rigid. And when something is rigid like that, it transfers force very, very well. And a good analogy is basically shoes, right? If you have big, thick-soled shoes on, those cross trainers like the Beast or something, they get the springs and all this other crap in them, and you basically you're just walking on pillows, right? Versus just a plain old flat leather shoe, right? No padding, no nothing, right? It's interesting. Most people don't realize this. As you're walking around, you feel less shock in the big, soft shoe, right? So you feel more comfortable, right? But the reason you feel less shock is because the force of your footfall and the reactive force of the ground are being dispersed through the space in the shoe, right? The same thing happens when you go to produce force while wearing those shoes. You're essentially weakening yourself. An easy way to feel this is take something really heavy that you need to push, stand on nice firm ground, push it, and then stand on a mattress and push it. Right? Or stand on something where you don't have good footing, where everything like that. If you can find, I mean, I don't know how you could figure this out, but if you can figure out a way to do it, try it on a trampoline. It would be impossible, right? Because every time you push into that, whatever it is, you're going to be pushing yourself into the ground because it's just going to give way. So there's that Newtonian kind of give and take that we're going to be using here, okay? Now, in order for us to get power from the ground, whether we're swinging a saber or swinging our fist or doing anything like that, we need to transfer it from our legs through our body, up through our shoulders, and into our hands, right? Now, that's harder than it sounds, because basically what we have here is a big sack of meat, right, that just kind of is floppy, right, when it's not activated. We have to control it with our nervous systems to do what we want to do. So it's a very, very finely tuned kind of signaling thing that goes up your entire body. We call it patterning. That teaches our body exactly what to do in exactly the right amounts to get what we want done. All right? And the more you do certain things correctly, the more your body finds the most efficient pattern, right, and really, really perfects that. Now, at the beginning, this is where we can get into trouble, right? If we're not careful, if we don't have good guidance, or we're not being careful, or something like this, we may do what's easiest rather than what's correct, because sometimes what's correct is very counterintuitive at the beginning. So it takes a lot of effort. So people go, well, that can't be right. Right? I just have to find the easiest, the path of least resistance. The problem is that most people start so late in life, they've pretty much muddled up all of their paths, so they can't tell what the path of least resistance is. They're going for the path of least pain, right, or the least discomfort. And, you know, while we don't necessarily want excessive pain, we do need effort, because it's the effort that moves us through. So how does breath then relate to that? As I said, if we're looking at a break and somebody shouts, right, what that does is it creates something what I call the McGill effect. I named this after a very prominent scientist, Stuart McGill, up in Waterloo, Canada, close to you, Eric. Foremost spine scientist out there. I've had several chances to work with him over workshops and all that kind of thing. Amazing, amazing research that he's doing. And he found, and I've mentioned this before on the show, that there's a kind of effect that happens in a body of a high-performance athlete. And that is the ability of that body to go completely rigid and then relax in an instant. So, boom, just, you know, we're not going and being like a statue, right? It's just for a second. So you take a sprinter, right? They're in that position, right? And when they say get ready, get set, go, and they're getting into those different positions, right? And they get with the the hips really, really high. The reason they're doing that is because they're loading up the hamstrings, right? They're stretching them out like a rubber band, like you're pulling it back on a slingshot. They're building up tension in their body that they're ready to release. At the sound of the starter's pistol, their whole body, boom, contracts with its strongest contraction, but it does it all together, right? Which sends it sailing off, because the body then immediately relaxes and it bounces right off of the ground and flies forward. Now that happens on every single step, right? Really amazing runners, whether they be sprinters, marathon runners, or whatever, will have these little explosions just at an instant. So when their foot hits the ground, it distributes the force of the impact, stores it, and then puts it back into the system to give you more forward momentum. And that's how a run works. When people are really, really good at that, it happens with just unbelievable speed. Again, some people are born with that. Some people have to be taught it. Some people will, I mean, there's obviously levels which we'll get at, but most people are way below their aptitude. So there's that. Now, for creating power, that's one thing. If we're going to use that diaphragmatic breathing, and just by practicing that we did at the beginning, you can start putting this in here. When we use our saber, let me get a good font here for us. Okay, so when I'm moving through here, right, there are two times when I need a lot of power, right? When I'm starting to move the saber, so it's at a resting position in a guard or something like that, right? Or to stop it, okay? So there should be two explosions. One, to start the motion in the saber, boom, and then it starts to move. And then your body should go completely relaxed, let the thing move, and then boom, it contracts to stop that movement. The exercise that it takes, or the effort that it takes, is very, very good exercise. This is wonderful resistance training, and resistance training is a great builder of strength, and strength is a great preserver of the human body. It's not everything, and we want to use as little strength as we can while doing martial arts and everything like that. But we want to make our body and keep our body as strong as possible, because we prepare for the eventuality when we lose our strength. But that's not the state that we want to exist in. We want to be strong, because sometimes a little bit of strength will go a long way, right? And the more that you have, the more you have, available to you. So that's kind of like the basics of the martial arts breathing. We're trying to create that intra-abdominal pressure, just like we're pushing that heavy object, a couch or whatever. But we're doing it in an extremely short space of time. When we are doing barehanded stuff, it's in a punch. Comes out here, boom, another explosion there. Using the saber, same type of thing. We can use shouts to not only to give us more energy in a performance and to keep us going, because that does propel you forward. And one of the reasons it propels you forward is because it gives you actual power. That is actually how your body generates power, true power. Okay, the energy to do work, power. Okay, so when you're feeling low in energy, when you're struggling through something, you grunt, you start to make sounds. And there's a psychological reason for that, but there's also this enormous mechanical reason for that. We tighten up our glottis, right? We make that grunt, right? A glottal stop. That creates enormous pressure in here. If we go, it helps us not only mentally and psychologically. And they did studies where cursing actually reduces your experience of pain. But it creates enormous pressure and power that we can then use in our movements. Now, when we start grunting unconsciously without trying, that means we're running low on reserves. We want to try to stay above that. And one of the ways we do that, excuse me, wrong pipe. One of the ways we do that is by trying to control our breath in that exercise that we did at the beginning, which is very, very simple. It took me 2 seconds to show you, right? Put your hands on your navel or wear your Jedi belt, anything like that. Inhale, push against your hands or your belt. exhale, make that belt loose, and do that. And of course, as the count gave us, keep the shoulders nice and steady. We don't want, okay, we want to try to keep as little work as possible happening in the intercostals. Now, interesting little fact, I have pediatric asthma. When I was young, I had asthma that put me in the hospital. It was a physical disability. I couldn't run. I couldn't do anything for any extended period of time without me almost suffocating. And yes, through lots of medications, all of that kind of thing, but even my doctor will tell you, once I started doing this and once I started really focusing on the breath, I can outlast people who do not have asthma, who've been at this for, a very, very long time. One of the reasons is because I kind of have to, I'm forced to focus on my breath, because if I don't, really bad things happen to me. So I really have to, I'm very, very cognizant of all that. But it just goes to show you that I will go through, a good hour worth of practice nowadays with hardly even breaking a sweat. My students and everybody else, they're sweating like dancing mules, hunched over, ready to pass out. That's not good or bad. It's just different, different particular levels. If you're having trouble getting through things, breathing is almost always where you're going to go wrong. So like in a Dulon is essentially a breath exercise. Here we have a period of time, a set of movements, which we have to accomplish. And you have to accomplish them with a particular vigor and particular, that you can't look really energetic at the beginning and really knackered at the end. But it's not easy, right? And one of the reasons that we do them, and one of the reasons that they exist in the forms that they do, is that they kind of replicate what it's like to be in an altercation with somebody, physically speaking, the amount of effort that's put forward, and the length of time. They're usually about a minute and a half to about 3 minutes, and that's the limit to what you're going to see in the real world as far as altercations, where you're going to be going for a long period of time. Just being able to go that long without getting out of breath is part of the training, and that's part of breath work. So that makes all of them a breath exercise. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of that aspect of it. So how about you guys? You got anything to add or ask? Or
I did want to follow up on something you mentioned there about breathing in Dulon. Because going back to something you said earlier on, in an empty hand style, you're basically breathing out on your punch or kick or whatever your technique is. You mentioned about the kind of tensing on the start and tensing on the stop with the saber. How does the breathing sort of work in terms of the timing of it with the moves in a Dulon? Because obviously you've got some moves that, because they're of a larger amplitude, they take longer to do. For example, side strikes. But shims are very, very small movements and can happen extremely rapidly. So you couldn't, in a sense, breathe on every shim, but you could on every sai. I mean, is there some kind of format to it?
There's no format. What it is it's part mental. But the exhale and the tensing, really, there's really not that much difference between, say, a sai and a shim. Not at all, right? you are perhaps more limited with the sigh because maybe your arms don't move fast enough. But to get another one out there. The breathing aspect of it is exactly the same. You're still going to go just that, right? You're not going to be through the motion, because the entire point is to boom, and then you're relaxed. The motion goes wherever you want it to stop. Boom! You just give it a little nudge, right? So it's like if you have a marble on a table, right, and you just kind of give it a nice little tap to get it to try to stop, right? That's essentially what we're doing. Can you do many shims in a row and breathe out on every single one? Absolutely, you can. You can try it right now and try it along home, right? If you just stand there, and we'll take a movement like this. We'll stick one hand out, and then we'll replace the other one right there with it, like this. Okay? Now, every time we push our hand out like this, you go, you blow out. Don't think about inhaling. You're just gonna exhale. Just a nice, sharp, you can make a sound poof, whatever you want to do. Okay? But as we go, and we're just gonna go, I'll start it out, slowish, and then we'll kind of move it up a little bit faster, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so here we go. We'll hold one hand out like this, and all right. So that's an exhale on every single shim, right? But as you noticed, there's also an inhale, okay? If you're thinking about it here, and yeah, it takes some training, right? You'll notice that all of a sudden your breath stops doing this and starts doing this, right? Probably the most extreme example of it is circular breathing, where people can hold instrument notes for ridiculously long times. But it's the same type of thing, right? Where there's actually inhales and exhales going on, right? But it's all in a string. You see? So there's a constant, kind of thing going there. So that's one exercise that's a very, very good one that can really kind of get that. So when we're talking about right here, right, in practice we may go. Probably the number one mistake people make is they try to blow out all of their breath at any one time. Like, an exhale means you exhale everything, right? Like, just because I say exhale doesn't mean you go, whew, right? That's exhaling, right? You just don't want to go, right? And if you can feel that, you can try, like, punching out and try inhaling instead of exhaling. So going, like, try to punch out and inhale at the same time, and it just feels really odd, right? Just because it's just not neurologically what we're kind of set up to do. So whether you're coming through like that, all of that, breathing has to be natural. The reason I'm not going to give a prescriptive way of breathing necessarily, especially at beginning levels, because it just confuses the issue. Just breathe from your diaphragm and keep breathing. I mean, that's all you got to do. So,
I have a question. You mentioned there are wrong ways to breathe. Could you maybe give us a few warnings on maybe what not to do when practicing, or especially swinging or doing dulon?
The what we want to do is we want to keep it out of the chest. So we don't want to do this. Right? Like when I was saying I was getting taller, you notice that, I kind of went up like this. And then when I start breathing, I don't go up and down anymore. It's just that during our conversations I start to slouch and blah, blah, blah. Right? And so then we always have to kind of reg it up. Now, slouching and all of that kind of stuff, we're actually totally okay doing that, right? It's totally okay to slouch and to move your spine as long as you're not carrying anything or trying to do any maximal effort with anything. You're not loading up the spine. You're golden. You should have nice, good, mobility of the T-spine and all of that kind of stuff. You should be able to accommodate all that. What we don't want to do is keep so much of it up here that we start to lose our flexibility here in our spine. Because if we're breathing here, we're using our intercostals, which are, or more of our intercostals, which are the muscles in between our ribs, right? And so we're using all of these muscles to try to get that bellows effect, right? You're pulling at this, and since we're not getting good diaphragm engagement right there, we're not getting a whole lot of volume change, so there's not a whole lot of suction, not a whole lot of air coming in. I've often given this out to people who want to know what it's like having an asthma attack. Go find a coffee stir, put it in your mouth, plug your nose, and try to breathe through that coffee stir, and that's essentially what it's like. You have very, very tight, very small airways, so there's not a lot of air coming in. And when you start to do this, not only will it start that process, it will start giving you the effect, which will actually increase your stress levels, right? So this is something, when chest breathing is something that is a stress reaction. We're hyperoxygenating our blood, right? We're trying to get pumped to do whatever we got to do. Could you push this forward into, say, Juyo, where you're using these things to kind of amp up your anger, all that kind of stuff? Yeah, you could, but there's a side effect to it as you start to get a little loopy. You don't have when you're really hyperoxygenated, you kind of get blinders on. You have pigeonhole vision. People can faint. So you always kind of want to get a good balance. So we want to do that. We don't want to breathe in through the mouth too much because, like I was saying before, there's excess moisture in our mouth with our saliva and all that. So number one, we're going to be taking in moisture into our lungs, which can, cause problems with certain people and all that. It will also tend to dry out our mouth. All of that. It can have effects on your gums, your teeth, all of that over the long run, yada, yada. But in our sense, we don't want to breathe in through the mouth because, again, gulping at air like that is one of those stress triggers. When we're short of breath, when we're running low on reserves, we're in danger, we start to gulp at air, right, to get as much air in there. And I mentioned earlier that if you breathe in through the nose, you get a good oxygen mix, right? And because you have carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen, all of these types of things, and we need all of them, right? The oxygen kind of ramps us up, the carbon dioxide mellows us out, okay? Get too much carbon dioxide, you mellow out permanently, but that's a different thing. But so you want to have a good mix. If you're taking it in through the mouth, you're taking in much bigger volumes of air, right? And most of it is getting sucked into your lungs, right? Whereas if you go through the nose, if you exhale through the mouth and inhale through the nose, you're going to be getting a mix of your excess breath that you just breathed out, right, and the new breath in there, which is going to keep a good mix kind of going on there. And then, of course, that dynamic changes depending on what, what the stimulus is or what environment you're in. So when you're thinking about breathing wrong, is you don't want to breathe from the chest, so you don't want your shoulders moving, you don't want your chest moving, all of that, and you don't want to breathe into the mouth. You also want to try to maintain here. You don't want to be like this. Okay, this is a posture which doesn't have good clean airways. Somebody like me who has asthma, that's a very common posture because this stuff gets really, really tight, and so it kind of pulls us in forward like this. So it's been something that I've had constantly had to do that. So the straighter up you are, the better you can breathe down. Anything else, guys? Oh. No? Okay. Well, we are getting here to the end. We're a little bit early, but I think we can keep it there. One thing I'd like to leave you with is that breath work may seem boring. It may seem, non-sexy, and you just don't want to do it. But the people that do it and get really, really good with it excel beyond what most people can. And it's not because they're necessarily imbued with anything special. It's just that they really took a hold of this really, really core fundamental process that happens in us and in everything that we do. Your breath, not only gives you life, but it gives you movement, it gives you energy, it gives you energy in every sense of the word, kinetic energy, metabolic energy, all kinds of energy, right? It's something that we have to do, otherwise we die. You don't have to be told to do it, but you'll do it anyway, and you can control it. So one of the best things about breath work is that it allows you some control over your body, some direct control over your body. And it's through that control you can make the changes that you want to improve your health and vitality. So that would be my final thought on that. So brings us to the end of the hour. Let me thank our panel, Eric, Gary, Michael, who had to take off. Thank you for joining us here. Darth Anonymous signing off. Have a great weekend. May the Force be with you, and happy sabering.